everybody, it's Sue from slowideas.com. I'm back. Welcome back. I hope you had a good Monday. I am excited to be working again on the Tunic top, and what's even more exciting is right now I have it on. I am checking to see if it fits. This is something that I usually do as soon as I can get a good sense of the shape of the garment overall before I start attaching and collars and things and spending more time working on the fiddly little details. If the garment doesn't fit at this point, that's my chance to do something about it, or toss it in the garbage and say, meh, I don't really like this, and go on to the next sewing project. I'm actually kind of surprised. At the end of last broadcast, I was looking at this and I was thinking to myself, I don't think I'm gonna really like this. Honestly, woven fabric tunics is not a style that I wear very often, and I did not think that this was like my thing. So, yeah, I figured, why not? Let's give it a shot. So, yeah, I'm trying it on, and I'm just gonna stand up here so you can see it in a little bit better detail. And I know it clashes horribly with my pants, but I'm really proud of these pants. I made them and I finished them recently, and they fit and they're really comfy. So I call them my pirate pants. Okay, so here's the tunic. It has slits at the side, and it's just pinned up the shoulder seams up the side seams right now, just so I could get a sense of whether I could get it on and off, and whether or not I kind of like how it felt on me. I had it on Madeline, my dress form, and I wasn't super keen, but now that I have it on me and I can sort of feel how it might look, it's gonna be a maybe as to whether or not I'll wear it in the end. Once I added the collar, it'll change the look again. It won't be quite so plain up here, and these will get tucked in, so it'll be slightly narrower across the shoulders. I'm dropping pins here. Oops. Okay. They're falling out of me. That's all right. I'm okay with there not being a pin in my armpit right now. Now, when I put it on, and I had it on my dress form, actually, I was realizing that there was a lot of fabric here in front, and so I have pinned out 2 lines of tucks, or darts they're called, here, and I'm going to try to add those to my pattern before I sew together the side seams. I'll add those tonight if I can. We'll work through what that looks like, adding darts for shaping, and then depending upon if I have time, I will put together the collar and start applying the collar. I might not get that far. It might be all about darts tonight, so we'll see. There's always tomorrow night. So I'm just gonna take myself off camera here and remove the shirt and put something else on. So bear with me. Here, I'll play the this theme song again. Here you go. Okay, yay, I'm back. All right, I whipped it off over my head. I didn't take any of the pins out because I wanted to make sure that even with the extra dart space taken out, that there was going to be enough room, enough sort of give and space in the garment, oops, for me to take it on and off over my head, because there's no zipper in this. I have already sewn the center back seam, and I'll just flip over to tabletop here so you can see it a little bit better. There we go. Pardon my mess. It's my instructions. So I have already sewn the center back seam as a French seam, and I did the shoulder seams as I showed you last night how to do French seams. This traps all of the loose possibly fraying edges of the fabric inside. So even after I've washed this, it shouldn't come apart. Linen is a fairly loose weave, so I'm going to wash this probably on delicate, and it should be okay, I think. Okay, so I've got these darts pinned out, and instead of just like taking a pen to my fabric and start, you know, sewing things on this garment, I'm actually going to try to figure out where I want them to be, and then I'm going to add them to the pattern piece, and then I will transfer those markings to my garment so that I can do the left side and the right side symmetrically, because my body is actually mostly symmetrical. Not everyone's is. Some people have one larger side than the other, and this is actually, darts are a really good way of customizing your fit. You can actually have smaller or bigger darts on different sides of your body. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to take out the side seam pinning for now so that I can work with just my front and my back pieces mostly separate. They are joined at the shoulder, so I can't get them apart completely, but at least they're not joined down the sides, which would make my work even harder. All right, so there goes that side. Oh, here's one of my dart pins. I don't want those to come out quite yet. So I literally just stood here with my pin cushion and like poked and grabbed and figured out where I wanted there to be less ease in the garment. Okay, so here's the front, and you can see I've got my, I'll just put the back out of the way here. So I've got my two darts. Now, I had no idea if I was putting these in symmetrically when I drew them. So I'm just gonna work on from one side and see if I can measure in from the side and see how far in my dart started. So if I take the outside dart leg as my beginning point, there's still a pin there for some reason, and I assume I'm going perpendicular to the edge, perpendicular to the grain. Things start 8 inches. So I want the start of this, or one side of this, to be 8 inches from my side seam around the waist. And I'm going to want it to be straight along the grain, I'm pretty sure. I seemed to pin it with the grain. Sometimes you can actually pin darts that go diagonally if your body needs them. You'll know because the fabric sort of bows and flows or wrinkles in certain ways if you try to make it go straight up and down. For the most part, however, doing it straight will cause the fewest problems. So I've got my pattern piece here, and actually, you know what? It would probably be easier if I worked on the other side, because then it'll match the pattern piece. All right, let's get the sewing machine out of the way. It's patterning time. Okay, here we go. Let's just check to make sure it's still that 8 inches. Yeah, on this side it was 8 1/4 inches. So I'm just gonna go with about 8 inches, and we'll see how that compares to this garment. Now, there's probably a good reason why I had all that extra space. It's because I did this full bust adjustment to create extra space here, but it also made extra space through the whole body. And hey, it turns out I don't really want it there. I want it down here where my tummy is and my hips, but I don't want it up here. So I'm going to take out some of this extra space with a dart. So let's just see how far away we are here. So the start of my extra space was 7 1/2 inches away. So if I go in 8 inches, it is like smack in the middle of where I added that. Fascinating. that actually makes my job pretty easy. This was the apex, the highest point of the breast, and I'm going to measure down from there. I don't want my dart to start closer than 2.5, maybe 3 inches. I'll just measure on myself where I want it to start. Yeah, I want it about 3 inches down from the apex. Maybe I'll go 3.5 just to be on the safe side. If you have your dart going too close to your apex, what'll happen is you get like this funny little pokey line, and it kind of creates like a triangular peak, and nobody wants that. We're not doing Madonna bras here. So, and how long do I want this dart to be? Well, from where I started pinning it, and I think one of my pins fell out here. Oh, no, it didn't. So I started pinning it out there, which is actually about 4 inches down from the apex. Let's go with that. So I pinned out from there to there. So I have, let's say, a 7-inch long dart, maybe 6.5 actually. 6.5 inches from where the top pin went in to the bottom pin came out. That pulled some of the volume out of my garment. Okay, I'm gonna put that aside, and I'm gonna get my ruler here. You can use a straight ruler. If you have a French curve, lovely, but that's okay. Now I am measuring things in inches, so I'm gonna have to keep, this is only a metric French curve. It doesn't have inches marked on it, which is a bit of a pain in the butt. Okay, so measuring down 4 inches from my bust point, I'm gonna get a pencil, which I hope you can see this mark, and there we go. And it was going to be 8 inches in from the waist point. So that's actually there. I don't want it to go beyond there. So I want my dart to be about maybe an inch. How much did I pinch out there? I'm going to measure the deepest part of the dart where I had the most taken out, and it's just barely an inch. So I'm going to say that my whole, or yeah, from the edge to where the pin is was just barely 1/2 inch, and so that means that my width of my whole dart is no more than an inch, and it's probably more like 7/8 of an inch wide. So I know that I want my dart to be 6 inches long. Let's be on the safe side and not be making it too big for now. And the middle point is at the 3-inch mark. Now, what you can actually do is you can actually raise or lower the middle point of your dart. You can shape your dart. So if I wanted to sort of have it really tuck in at the top there and then gradually give me more, like, release the fabric, then I could raise sort of the fat point of my dart up an inch. And you know what? I think for now I'll do a balanced one. So there's the middle point. And at the middle point, I want it to be about 7/8 wide. So it's really hard to see measurements on this measuring tape. So I'm going to make it 7/8, so 1/2 of 7/8. Oh God, that's like hard fractions. That's like, what, 5/16. Thanks, math. And that's 3/4. There's 7/8. Okay. So those are the two sides. This is my start and my end point, and I'm just gonna give it like about an inch on either side of my, well, maybe a 3/4 of an inch of straightness on either side, roughly. And then I will taper it in to the dart point, that starting and ending point. Now, I've drawn straight lines because I'm figuring you have straight lines. You probably don't have a French curve if you're just getting going with your sewing machine. However, if you happen to have any kind of curved rulers or just be really good at drawing curves, instead of having that be like a sharp angled point, you can just gently curve it, really with anything. You can even eyeball this. The great thing about the French curve, of course, that it lets you sort of like flip things over and draw mirrored curves. Now I can't even see that barely, so I'm just going to go over it with a marker, and then maybe you'll have a half a chance of seeing it too. There we go. And coming down here. So that's a fairly prominent point there. I actually think that it would be a little bit better if I sort of extended it to make the angle a little less sharp, so that it can just be a little bit more gradual. It'll make a nicer dart if it's a more gradual line. So you'll hardly even notice when you're doing it. So I've just added a dart to my pattern. It was that easy. Just a little bit of geometry and some measuring, and Bob's your uncle. So now I can take the pins out of my garment fabric. Where'd my pin cushion go? There it is. Ta-da! Okay. And I'm going to fold this in half. Oops, one more pin. Try to flatten it out. I might actually turn on my iron so I can press that. Get my pattern out of the way. And once again, if you have a tracing wheel and tracing paper, you're going to do it my way. If you don't have a tracing wheel, you're going to have to use a hand needle and thread, and you'll actually stitch a line through your pattern and then go underneath your pattern and snip it. You can Google tailor's tacks and it'll tell you how to do these things. I pretty much never actually do them because I have all kinds of other marking tools, so I'm sorry that I can't provide guidance for you on that. But tailor's tacks, I'm sure there are lots of internet tutorials on that. Okay. So my piece of fabric here is not completely a flat item of fabric anymore because I sewed those bust darts in on the side. But for the most part, I can lay it out so that I've got my center fold back. This is just a little bit tricky over here. I'm going to press this side as well. There we go. So I've got flat fabric to work on. Now I've got my tracing paper. And because this is the right side of the fabric, I can just put my tracing paper right down like that. This is really only going to go through one layer. So there's not a lot of point in putting tracing paper under the bottom. But if you, well, let's give it a shot. Let's see what happens. So I have another piece of tracing paper. Well, it's pretty ancient. That may not actually give me any line at all because it looks pretty worn out, but we'll see how that goes. Okay, so I'm putting my pattern piece on. I'm putting it upside down because that way it lines up with this. I'd have to just flip the fabric over, or I could do it this way. And I just want to make sure that my center fold is lining up. So I'll pin those in place so I know that I'm working with a straight piece of fabric aligned the same way the pattern is aligned. Okay, so I get my tracing wheel, which looks like a medieval torture device, but it is torture if I lose this. And I'm going to make sure that my tracing paper is face down against the fabric where I want the lines to actually go. There we go. Okay, and I'm just going to press really hard. This is not easy on pattern tissue, like it kind of wrecks the pattern tissue, but I can just tape that up later to reinforce it and it'll save it. Okay, pull that off and see what kind of lines we ended up with. Oh, great lines on this side. You can't see it, but I sure can, and it's nice and dark, and it'll be easy to follow. And on this side, nada. Okay, so we'll just put down the tracing paper on this side and lay this out so that it matches up. Lines up. Not even going to bother pinning it in place this time. I'm just going to hold it in place. Oops, I need to get my tracing paper under where I'm tracing. Oops. Get that straight. And bingo, we have a beautifully marked chalk line for where I'm going to sew. And now we can actually just go right on ahead and sew that, and then our bodice will be ready for us to do the collar, which we'll have time for tonight, I think. Yay! All right, bring over Elle's sewing machine, and I'm just gonna relocate my tabletop cam so that it becomes the sewing machine cam. Sorry for any motion sickness caused by my YouTube video. Ooh, it's sideways. And I need to add some lighting here. There we go. Okay, let's fix that sideways thing here. Transform. Cut. There you go. Okay. And just make that so you can see my sewing machine bed and what I'm working on. There we go. Yay. Okay. So to do these darts, what I'm going to do is, let's get it mostly me for the time being here. Now you can see what I'm up to beside my sewing machine. There we go. The joys of video software. I'm using a tool called OBS software. It's kind of nifty. Okay, so in order to sew this seam, I'm going to take the top and the bottom points of the dart, and I'm going to pull them up and flip the other side under them. And I'm really trying to be very, very clear that I have got a straight line here across my fabric. I'm going to lay it down and sort of hold that in place with my fingers, and then just sort of give it a little bit of a press with the iron. Try not to let that shift around too much. And then put some pins in there to hold that in place while I sew it. Okay, taking it over to the sewing machine. I'm going to start. Now, there's two ways of doing darts. Oh, let's see me again. Hi. There. Hi. There's two ways of doing darts. The couture way is to start at the fat part and go towards each of the points. So off the edge of the point slightly, and then cut the threads, tie the top and bottom threads in a knot, and then trim them short. This is not a couture garment. I am just going to start at one end and sew to the other. So now you know how you should do it, and now you know how I am going to do it, and they are very different things. Okay, I'm just lowering my needle just at the very edge of where that line was, and I'm gonna, my presser, my sewing machine foot kind of sometimes goes on the fritz, and I have to do this. There we go. It's got power. It's an old machine. It's 20 years old. It's taken a licking and it keeps on kicking. Okay, there I am backstitching a dart, which I shouldn't do, but I do anyways. So I am trying to follow that line as much as I possibly can. So it's really important that you've drawn that line straight. It is not easy to follow a dart line, but I do the best I can. I backstitched a few stitches, oops, and there we go. I've done one dart. Take the pins out and press as I sewed it. And this isn't in the instructions for this top. Of course, it's not part of the design of the top. I'm just adding it because it looks better on me. But generally speaking, you want to press darts towards the center. That may vary. Different patterns may do it differently. But I'll show you why I press towards the center. And that is because it changes where sort of the shadow of the dart line hits on the fabric. So let's just try and get a nice close-up view here. Okay, so the dart is pressed to this side. So there's a bit more volume, sort of it's a bit thicker there. And the center of the garment is over here. And so as people are looking at me front on, the higher part will be like to the center. And what that does is it makes the dart just ever so slightly less obvious and less noticeable. So you press darts towards the center front and the center back for that reason. Okay, so I've done one side, and gotta love working with linen because you get the nice crisp edges. So I'm gonna get the other side, and I'm gonna get it on the table so all the fabric is supported. I'm gonna take the top and the bottom parts and flip the other bit under. What I'm trying to do as I'm picking up the top and bottom parts here is I'm trying to make sure that I've got the straight weave of, like the weave of the fabric. So those like lengthwise threads are gonna be aligned with my fold. And that will let the fold sit nice and straight. It's not gonna have any wiggles or wrinkles to it when I sew it. If I haven't got it straight up and down, then I'm gonna get some weird things going on. So if you've drawn your lines and they don't perfectly align with the grain, go with the grain instead of your lines, because drawing on the lines is not an exact science. So the physics is, so the physics of fabric is that if you have something that's a fold and it's meant to go straight, then put it on the straight grain and you'll have way better time. Okay, so finding the end of my line here, holding those threads so they don't go up into the machine. I'm gonna roll a couple hand wheel There we go, until I'm in. Take a couple stitches, back stitch, and away I go. Tricky to stay on this line, let me tell ya. Okay. All right, so I'll press that. And I'm going to open it up and press it into the center. There we go. Okay, and so I'm just going to show you something here on this dart. Obviously, where I had drawn my lines, this pink line here, is not actually where I sewed. But I did get approximately the same size dart as on the other side. It's maybe a 1/16 of an inch bigger in comparison, but it is on the straight grain, and that is what matters. Now I'm going to look and make sure that they've started and ended in about the same point vertically. You know what? I'm actually off by about a 1/2 inch. That's annoying. That's going to show up on the outside. So I'll take this one that's a little bit lower, and I'm just going to give it a little extra sewing action so that it starts a little bit higher up on the garment. So put that in a little higher and blend it into my other line. Not going to be able to see that on the outside. It's all good. Okay, cut that short and cut these threads so they're not dangling around inside, tickling me while I'm wearing my garment. And get the bottom ones, those are pretty short. And this side. There we go. Okay, so I've added some much needed shaping to this garment, and now I'm just going to put it back on my dress form and see what I think. This is where you would want to try it on again and see what you think. So you could pin the edges shut and then try pulling it on over your head, because this is a garment that doesn't have any zipper openings. So you want to make sure you can get it on and off. So I'm just going to kind of hold the edges and see what I think of it. Yeah, I like that. It just gives it a little extra bit of shaping in the body. It doesn't take out too much of the fabric, so it's not going to make it too tight. I love it. Okay, we're going well here. So it's been about half an hour. I really wanted to get this collar together tonight, so even though it might make for a kind of a long broadcast, I want to show you some of the basic parts of the collar. This one is a really easy collar. So we've already applied the interfacing, and I think what I might do is just change this camera so that it shows my table as well. Oops. Oh dear me. Okay, there we go. You can see I have this really cool like flexi tripod thing. I got this from London Drugs. It was like 25-30 bucks, and I absolutely love it. It's super handy. Okay, so here's the piece of collar that I applied the interfacing to before I cut it out, and here is just another collar. Should be the same. Cross your fingers. They should be the same. They haven't shrunk or anything while sitting around on my table. That would be weird. So what I've done is I've already applied the interfacing. Here's what the instructions say. Pin fusible interfacing to wrong side of collar. Cut diagonally across corners that will be enclosed with seams. Fuse interfacing in place following manufacturer's directions. With right sides together, stitch facing to collar, leaving notched edges open. Trim seam. Okay, a few things here. A, I've already done the application and I did not leave out the corners. My bad. But the other thing I noticed is that I don't seem to have notches. Oops. So I'm going to grab my pattern piece again and see what those notches are. Ah, I see. Those show the center and the center back. So I need to get a marking pen and make sure that I've got that marked. So here's my center back. Make sure it's really lined up with the edge here, so I've actually marked it where the center is. Oh, I didn't, look at that. Okay, and mark on it where the notch was. Turn it over, mark the other notch. And I'm gonna apply, oh, and then there's the dots. I need to have the dots on there. And put the dots on this side. Okay. Oh, you know what? I don't think you can see what I'm doing very well. Where's my computer mouse now? Where did I put it? There, now you can see what I'm doing better. Okay. Good, good, good. Alrighty, so that, and I'm gonna see, okay, I had marked the notches on the interfacing side. I just did it a few days ago, and so it's starting to fade somewhat. This Taylor's marking pen will do that. It washes out, but it also fades out over time. Okay, there's the dot on that side. I can't see the dot on this side, so I'll just remark it. Okay, there we go. So with my right sides together, I'm going to stitch the facing to the collar. The facing is, this is the tricky part here. So the collar is the thicker bit. That is what's going to be on the outside. It's what you're going to see. It'll be on the top when I sew it together. You'll see how this works, I promise. The part that we did not apply the interfacing to is the facing. So collar, facing. Collar has interfacing applied and goes with a facing. Okay, now we're all just confused as heck, so let's get on with sewing. We're going to line this up so that the edges match as much as humanly possible. And what's interesting is because one of these pieces does have the interfacing on it, it is more firm and it holds its shape more than the other piece. So I will pin that side, trying to get as exact as possible, but leaving enough space for me to work around. Pin the center. Hopefully I've got that right in the center. Oh, okay, that's odd. That is not the center back on this piece. What is going on? What has happened here? I'm gonna lay this down again and check. Oh, I marked wrong. I'm gonna remark that. There. Okay, that one's right. Sloppy work. Okay. So we'll mark that center. Still not exactly correct. That is kind of bizarre. But, I mean, it's a matter of millimeters. It's not the end of the world if I don't get this right. But I want it to be as close to matching as I can get it. Okay. Now, I always try to remember which direction I'm going to sew from and have those pins going that way. If I am pinning with my right hand going up the garment, then I know that I'm pinning in the right direction so that I'll be able to easily remove the pins as I go along and I'm sewing. So in this case, these pins are not heading in the right direction. There. So I'm going to change those. Okay, so the couture way of sewing a collar would be to start from the center and sew outward and down, and then sew out and down. And that's so that things are balanced and really sort of like clean. This is not a couture garment, so I'm just going to start at one end and sew around. It may end up actually warping the fabric somewhat and sort of putting it off balance, but I will survive. Okay. Woo. Doop-a-doop. Can we see? Are we getting motion sickness? A little bit. We're a little twisted here. We're going to bring the sewing machine in. Okay, great. Here we go. Also, if this was a couture garment, I would hand baste this before I sewed it. If I was using slippery fabrics, I would indeed hand sew that using long stitches so that it didn't move around while I was sewing it. Linen, however, is nice. It doesn't slip around. Okay, this is, what kind of seam allowance am I doing with this? It doesn't say, so the default is 5/8 of an inch. So I'm going to get my masking tape guideline and I'm going to put it at the 5/8 inch mark. My little cheat there so I can actually really see that line. Starting from the edge, once again, whoops. Okay, let's give her, all right, we got electricity here. We got power. And keep my pin cushion nearby. Wow, 5/8 of an inch is a really big seam allowance. Okay, now here's the thing. I'm going to want a 5/8 inch seam allowance along that way too. So I'm going to get a ruler, a little one. Where's my little ruler? Here we go. And I'm going to measure in 5/8 of an inch along this line. And just put a mark there. And that's what I'm aiming for. I'm not going to go past that. What I'm going to do is sew to about 3/8 of an inch away, and then I'm going to shorten my stitch length to less than 2 millimeters. Actually, probably like barely 1 millimeter, and I'm going to take tiny little stitches until into that point. And then I will pivot half of a pivot, take one stitch across, and then do the rest of my pivot. Now, Sue, why on earth do you do this strange ritual? Well, because have you ever seen a shirt collar that is starting to come apart at the ends? Like the point is starting to open up. The layers of the fabric are coming apart from each other. That's what this is going to prevent. By having those tiny little stitches at the point of your collar, you will make sure that your collar corner stays nice and crisply together, sandwiched together. And by taking that, so sewing into the point, doing one stitch that way, and then coming down, that actually eases that corner a little bit, gives a little bit more space for the fabric from turning it inside out, has a little bit more space to fit in there, so it ends up not looking quite so fat. This is one of the sort of tailoring tools for shirt collars that I've picked up along the way. So now as you do your first shirt collars, hopefully you will have them looking as awesome as a tailor's shirt collar. And now I can lengthen my seam back to the slightly more than 2 millimeters it is. And I'm really working hard to keep this edge along my guide tape. Even though I didn't do a very straight job of cutting, I'm trying to keep my stitching straight by using that guide. Past the center point. Taking pins out as I go just to save me from later having to go back and take them out. Okay, now as I get to this edge, I'm going to leave my needle down so that the fabric doesn't move around. And I will measure my 5/8 of an inch in from this side. Out there. Make sure that it's 5/8 from there. Okay, that's the point I'm aiming for, believe it or not. Yep. There's my corner. That is a lot of seam allowance. Heck. Okay, get that pin out of the way so I'm not fooling around with it. And I'm almost there. I will shorten my seam up to just around 1 millimeter. Take a couple of stitches. I'm mostly using my hand wheel here to get me in there to almost exactly at the corner, and then I'll take 1 stitch across, maybe 2. If it's a really sort of fat, like it's a thick fabric, you can take 2 to make more room. Let's take 2 on this side. We can compare the corners. And finish my turn, take a couple of small stitches, and then return my seam length, or my stitch length, just past 2. Oh, there's that pin that wasn't in the wrong direction. Here's where you can see that I did not cut my top and my bottom the same. And I'll get right to the end, back stitch, and that collar is stitched together. Hooray! Okay, so once again, I'll let you see what I'm up to here with the tabletop cam. Sort of, kind of, see it? Yeah, there we go. Okay, so what do I do when I'm finished sewing a seam? I press it. Exactly, you got the deal. I'm not moving it. I am picking my iron up and putting it down, and giving it steam and weight to set those stitches into the fabric. Okay, so I will now trim this seam. So there's a couple ways of trimming. The couture way, so the beginner way is just to cut about half of your seam allowance off. If you want to get a little bit more fancy, then you will cut more of the facing off than the outside, and I'm going to do that. So I really wish I had applique scissors. They make it easier to do this job, trimming between layers. But I just had to buy myself a new computer, so I'm not buying applique scissors for a while. And then I'm going to cut a slightly bigger seam allowance there. It doesn't have to look absolutely grand and perfect and straight. You know, as you go along, you'll get better at cutting straight lines. So I'm going to cut this direction now. Cutting my under layer smaller. Ooh, don't get too close to the stitching line, because if you cut right through your stitching, you're going to have problems later. I'll do it this way so you can see a little bit better. Well, I'm not really cutting wide enough here. I need to get closer to my seam. Maybe like about 3/16 of an inch for your lower level layer. I'll do this bit here as well. And then maybe 1/4 of an inch or 3/8 of an inch for your upper, or your collar layer. That's the reinforced layer of your collar. This is called layering your seam allowances. Now, one thing you do at the corners here is you actually want to trim your corners right off, because you're going to turn this inside out. There is not room for all of this fabric here to fit into this little pocket. So you're going to want to just sort of trim pretty close to that corner. Not all the way through the stitching, of course, because then you're in trouble, but very close to it. And then stitch away. And then I'm going to finish doing my seam allowance on this side. There's some parts here on the seam where I kind of wobbled a little bit. Yeah, that's okay. I mean, in an ideal world, it would be perfectly straight, but I'm not in an ideal world. I'm just going to trim that a little bit more. There we go. You could do this with a rotary cutter, I suppose. This last bit, it would be pretty hard to do 2 different layers of different widths. I can only imagine. Okay, so here I am at this corner again, and I'm going to cut it pretty fine down to there. Ta-da! Okay, that's all garbage, and now I'm ready to turn this inside out, and then we'll have a basic collar. So I'll reach in with my thumb, my finger, and I'm going to poke that out as much as I can. I can take a pencil and really, really gently kind of poke that out there. There are things called corner turners. A pencil works just fine. Let's see if I can find my $6 sewing stick, basically, is what this is. It's a finely shaped sewing stick. Can't believe the things I spend money on for sewing sometimes. So it's supposed to sort of help you get right into the corners. I'm having mixed results with this. I haven't really got a shape that I want yet. Let's see, what other pokey things? I don't want to use scissors because I don't want to poke right through my sewn corner here. So I'll just use my pencil a little bit more. That's really kind of giving me the gears in terms of trying to make that a nice point. So let's see if I can trim off a little bit more seam allowance. There's not a lot more to give, honestly, without that starting to fray. So maybe I'll just do a little bit of more diagonal, but not get too close to that because I don't want my corner to disintegrate in this fabric. This is why the instructions actually tell you to not put your interfacing on the corners of your collar, because it creates extra bulk that you have to tuck inside your turned corners. So yeah. Okay, that's getting a little bit better. I'm kind of happier with how that turned out. And this corner, now which is the one that had, that one looks like it had 2 stitches, but maybe I did 2 stitches on both. I'm not really sure. So try and minimize the amount of fabric that has to stuff itself into this corner without risking my points coming unstitched or fraying away. Just kind of go at it with the finger and the pencil. Ah, this is very nice. I want it to look nice and pointy. Okay, that's got that. All right, now that I've got the corners done, what I'll actually do is I'm going to use my iron just to press my seam away from this facing part. I'm going to try and get as far into the corners as I can, pressing the seam allowance towards the underside of the collar. My iron cord isn't long enough. It's looped around something here. Okay, and what that does is it helps to create a a bit of a fold here, and I want the unreinforced side. Actually, you know what? I did that wrong. I should have pressed it towards the interfaced side. You know what? I think I trimmed these seam allowances the wrong way too. Oopsie. Well, you live and learn. That might work better. Get into that corner there. Okay. Yeah, here we go. This is folding a lot better. What I want is so that when it's laying flat like this, I don't want the seam to show. I want it to kind of roll underneath and hide itself, because that'll just look a lot better on the finished garment if I can't see the seam from the top side. So I'm just gonna work at it with my fingers until I have it the way I want it, and maybe give it a little steam and pressure and set it in. Once I've steamed something, I let it sit and cool off a little bit before I move it around. Otherwise, I'm just weakening my fibers for no good reason. So I let it sit. If you have something, like if you work with wool a lot or linen a lot, something you can get yourself is what's called a tailor's clapper. This is a fancy hunk of wood that I paid a lot for. You can probably just grab a piece of wood and sand it down. It's got some nice little routed edges to hold on to. Woo! I love tailoring accessories. I can't help myself. So I'm just gonna... What this does when I use this is I've provided steam and pressure, and I put my clapper down on it and just hold it in place. And the weight of the wood helps to keep the pressure on and get that crease really set in. And it also sort of reflects back some of the heat into it. And oh, it just gives the nicest, crispest folds. This is better than this, I can tell you. So yeah, that's where using a big old sanded hunk of wood can help your sewing. So if you have any people in your home who are into woodworking, you can say, hey, you can make me something for my sewing. You can make me a clapper. And then they'll be like, what? And you can Google, what is a tailor's clapper? And then show it to them. And they'll be like, that's so easy. But you would be amazed at how much these things sell for in the store. I think it's because it's probably a particular type of wood. Maybe it's maple or something like that. But it feels all nice. It's very nice and sanded. Okay, there we go. There is our collar. Tomorrow night I will actually attach the collar. The last step is to just baste those edges together on the machine, and I'm not actually going to do that right now. I'll do it off camera. You can do it by hand or on your machine, and you just want it so that the edges aren't flopping around. That's all. So tomorrow night, same channel, probably the same time, 7:30. I will be attaching this to my garment and sewing. We're going to talk about the facings. Because the side seams of this actually kind of happen towards the end, surprisingly. We're going to do all the fiddly bits before we close up our garment. Okay, thank you very much everyone for joining me tonight. If you enjoyed it and you want to, please press the subscribe down there. Press the subscribe button. And you will find out about more broadcasts and videos as I do them, and you will also validate me as a YouTube creator, and isn't that what we all want from life, is to feel validated. Thanks very much, keep sewing, and don't forget to send me questions or comments if you have them. Bye!